old guy like me, cloud's going to kill Cisco.
There's a lot of things that were predicted to kill Cisco,
exactly.
and as we were saying, the dead are living longer than predicted.
Exactly.
We see this, and it's not a judgment. It's just large cloud providers will do this because there's really a benefit to optimize on that end.
Things,
yeah, enterprise. It's like instead of you buying a car because you need to drive, it's like I buy a kit and I build the car.
Yeah.
So there's a cost of opportunity. Where do you invest, right?
Yeah.
And if you're trying to figure out how to get faster from A to B, you're rather looking like, what's the infrastructure, what's the road I need, and what car do I need, and not as like, what's the best engine in the car.
Hey everyone, David Bombal, back with a very special guest at Cisco Live. Thomas, welcome.
Hey David, good to meet you here.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, you just spoke offline. You know someone else who I've interviewed, Hank Preston?
Yes, I do. I work with him.
Yeah.
Joint customers. Yeah, he's a lot of fun.
So tell me, we were talking offline as well, a bit about your background. I'm obviously traditional routing and switching, old man for a lot of people watching. There's been big changes, in the data center, traditional routing and switching.
Yeah.
You said cloud is everywhere now.
Cloud is everywhere.
Take us on a journey, in your experience, what's happened, and like how tell us a bit about yourself, the journey to cloud, and like things I need to worry about.
You were number one when you open up as old man. I was like, I'm feeling like the same, but anyway, thanks for the reminder.
21.
21. There we go. Listen, I'm responsible for the data center networking portfolio in Cisco.
Yep.
Journey to cloud. I mean, cloud is used a lot as a term.
Yeah.
I see it probably multiple aspects. One is clearly what I see most people saying as cloud is public cloud.
Yeah.
And a discussion around what workloads, particularly in the data center space, are going to be run in the cloud versus on-prem. And that's quite frankly, there's a lot of interesting transition and reality check, what I see over the last couple of years. But the other part of cloud is really more around the operations model, which I think is equally important and interesting, quite frankly, which is actually really impacting, to your point, the people running the networks. Because what happens there, I think, is really what changes how do you operate. And I actually think it's a good thing, quite frankly. The analogy I have, since you mentioned routing switching, we used to say, hey, if a network runs, don't touch it.
Exactly.
Bad. Bad, right? In my personal opinion, I'm not. It's really a reflection on, in the past, you configured and you never touched it again, which was fine.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas now it's really what you want is you want to readjust, you want to configure, you want to be able to have infrastructure as a service kind of, and that really means you want to be comfortable changing. And so this brings us over to why people expect that because of cloud, but what people want to do is operate the infrastructure like they would have access to a cloud. And so these are some of the interesting changes I see and where cloud fits.
So I mean, as traditional network guy, it's quite a change. And I've got to learn Kubernetes, I've got to learn Docker, I've got to learn like security in the cloud. It's like crazy amount of stuff to learn. Yeah.
At the same time, I think, everybody cooks with water is probably number one. I think the important point is if you I think where your question is going, if you're a networking guy, typical routing switching guy, number one, lessons learned, networking is important, will stay important.
Is it important in the cloud?
Absolutely. What I have seen over the last 3 or 4 years is customers jump putting workloads in the cloud, primarily driven or mostly driven by the virtualization teams.
Yeah.
Right? Taking, hey, I have a workload here, I have a VM, just taking lift and shift.
Yes.
What happened then, people have more and more workloads in the cloud, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, I need to have high availability. I need to have different zones. I need to be able to get traffic from one zone to the other. Guess what? That's a routing problem. And what we're seeing was most of my larger customers on the enterprise side, routing and switching is not going to go away. Routing in particular is not going to go away because it's a very, very important aspect of how do you connect cloud instances between different providers as well as then back to your own estate. So actually routing is, I want to say more important than ever, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, YouTube, a lot of people,
Yeah.
routing, networking is going away.
No, absolutely not. I think networking is part of a service, but it's absolutely not going away. I see more interest in networking, maybe not necessarily in the way we thought about networking in the past. Oh, it's a router with an interface. It's more, oh, now it's a gateway, or depending which cloud provider you're talking about. But it's basically a gateway with an IP interface, and I need to know what's my next hop. Not going away at all, actually. Quite frankly, if you see at some of the problem sets that customers struggling with in the cloud as well as in their own data centers around having the ability to understand their network graph, their topologies, that spreads much wider than it used to be. And so the first thing you're going to do is it's a logical network, right? It's not the routing and switching, hey, I need to go on a CLI, but it is, I have an IP interface, I have a subnet, I need to know where I go next, what are my hops, I need to be able to build the graph in software, I need to have digital twin capabilities. That's all networking.
I mean, so if you were talking to your younger self, a lot of people watching this may be younger or wanting to transition in. They might not be like old, boring networking guys like me. What would you say to your younger self if you were starting today, or if you were like perhaps a bit older, but you were trying to get into this? Like, where do I start? What should I look at? What's important? What are the mistakes? Like, perhaps you can tell some stories. Like, give us sort of a roadmap if you can.
I mean, one thing is don't feel like you need to chase the latest thing. Just to your point. Kubernetes or ChatGPT is the latest buzzword everybody wants to talk about. The funny thing is there are important things, but there are some basic principles that will stay, and you just apply and it makes your life easier. If I look back, right, the one transition we clearly went through in the networking world is we used to think about devices as the foundation block, and they still are, but we moved on to fabrics and then distributed fabrics and topologies, because in the end, it's not about is the device up or down, which is important, but it's really can I provide connectivity from A to B or from between endpoints, and so there's more of a systems thinking. How do you operate infrastructure? And I think that if I give one advice is like think about that when you're trying to figure out what skills to pick up or where to focus. And so with respect to networking in particular, so there's clearly I think a lot of this is going on for 5-10 years since you mentioned Hank around automation, right? How am I able to control infrastructures through automatic means to programming, basically, right? And I'm not talking about C+ programming, like some Python, of us might do. Could be Python, could just be APIs, and then you start some standard tooling, right? The trick is really not, in my personal opinion, you need to not be an expert programmer. Pick some standard tooling, so you don't have to create your own, and then apply it to a common problem, which is, and the networking is really, how do I create connectivity and monitoring that I have linked between endpoints? Right, and so this is where automation fits in. This is where Python SDKs might fit in, where maybe you have Ansible for automation. Maybe you are coming from the cloud mindset as a younger person, and you start with a Terraform approach. But it's basically how do you automate infrastructure? And then the next one, this is where a little DAML discussion comes in, is, well, this is pushing configuration, but you want to actually have a model, which is where some of the mathematics comes, right? When you talk about some of these networks, no surprise, the neural network is a network. If you look at the picture, it's very much like a network graph.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so some of the things that are relevant there absolutely apply to networking, which is actually to me fascinating because and I'm dating myself a little bit, when I did my degrees, it was about neural networks. And so here we are 25 years later. And he was like, wow, it's the latest. No, it's actually she's bringing this together, how this applies to networking, which is actually very much similar. It's just exciting. Yeah. And so I think my main message, networking is very, very important because in the end it connects. The famous word is the network is the computer. Yeah. Right? These days I would say the network is the cloud because it's literally what it is. So it is the core, but there are a lot of things you can apply around automation modeling that I think crucial because what you want as a user of an infrastructure, you want to be able to predict outcome. And modeling is very important. Observability is very important. Being able to connect the dots, which is the network, is very important. So I actually think it's an exciting space. If you're a networking person, you're going to be the center no matter what you're going to do.
AI, is it going to change everything? Like in the cloud, is it something I should study? Is it something I should get into? Is it change the way I do my work?
My recommendation is study what you can do with AI technology. Don't over-rotate everything is in the cloud because the way I see AI is very important with respect to networking is you can use those mechanisms to predict better behavior, how networks will operate if you do apply a change to network. You can do this before you actually apply a change. This is like the digital twin concept.
Yeah.
Very, very important. Can I use AI for prediction of network failure, right? Let's see, there's this idea around, I have optical interconnects. Can I look at the performance characteristic and then do AI modeling in the back end based on some data sets and saying, hey, I can now predict this link may go down based on historic trend within the next 3 days. That's cool stuff. So in that sense, yes, you should study that and think through how you can use the power of that to make networks more reliable if you're in the network world as an operator. So absolutely yes. I think that's very important. The other piece I think where it's important is there's certain application that will drive how networks should be built, which is a completely different angle.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, yeah.
Because right now, we talked about AI mostly, how to use it as a tool to automate and monitor networks better. But there's also another work angle on AI, which is around, if I have to build big AI clusters, is the network the same that we used to build in the past? Or is there different characteristics I need in the network? And so that's, quite frankly, actually a very interesting topic to think through. How to optimize my architecture and what are some of the capabilities I need to build in to a network to optimize for ML workloads attached to that network.
Security?
Security is one important piece.
It's a big problem, eh?
Security, I don't think is any new. It's just what happens is, as most people say, the data center is distributed, which means security becomes a distributed problem, which means it's a little more complex. So you need to actually build in security into what you do instead of what we used to in the past. Security sits on the border because there's no more border. It's just distributed, so it has to be built in. But security itself is nothing new. It's just it needs to be part of the design by default.
So certification-wise, let's say I'm starting out.
Yeah.
CCNA is still a good choice to start with?
CCNA is a good idea.
And then perhaps a DevNet associate?
Absolutely, you should do that.
And then perhaps AWS starter?
I think you should look at one or two of these clouds, whether it's AWS, whether it's Azure, whether it's OCI or Google.
It doesn't matter. Just like choose something to get the foundation.
Think one of those. What's important to learn is how cloud providers think about it, right? Because there's a different way how do you think about a mindset. If you're coming from the cloud side, and I made that comment earlier, right? You more think from the endpoint side.
Yeah.
I have a workload on an endpoint and I need to connect endpoints together, and the network is just the means. That's the mindset. Or sometimes the terms people are using is there's a provider and a consumer, and I need to find the relationship how to get from A to B. If you're coming from the networking side, you typically think about, I have segments and I put endpoints into segment, and by being a member of a segment, I know they can talk. So it's a different way how to look at this problem. So it's, I think, a very, very helpful thing having the network architecture view to think about how do you segment infrastructure at the same time, and that's why it doesn't really matter which cloud you're going to start with, because they're pretty much very similar how they think about the outside-in view, which is endpoints and how they need to communicate.
I was hearing in some of the keynotes this discussion about how Cisco are like in between, like customers who have their stuff on premise.
Yeah.
Plus, you're not like dedicated to one cloud provider, because like old guy like me, cloud's going to kill Cisco.
There's a lot of things that were predicted to kill Cisco,
exactly.
and as we were saying, the dead are living longer than predicted.
Exactly.
Yes, no, it's not going to happen.
Because we thought like cloud was just networking was going to go down. A lot of people were predicting, like you said, it never happened.
There's the whole cloud is a network, as I said, right?
Yep.
The network is the cloud, so that's not going to change. And I think the other piece, what you're saying, is how much do customers operate their own data centers versus moving the cloud? And I think that's quite frankly, there's going to be a healthy balance, because in the end, it's a business problem, right? There's a cost to anything. What a lot of people figured out is there is gravity to data. It's not easy to move it around, pure from an amount of data you need to move, as well as from the cost of moving data, and then some of the regulatory compliance restriction where you can put your data, right? And so because of that, I think every customer I'm talking to is ending up in a hybrid world, right? They will have some data sets in their own four walls or rented four walls but dedicated, and then they will have some of their data set and application running in cloud infrastructure where they're really going after service. And I don't think there's a right or wrong. As a lot of this is really, in the end, it's a business decision between what's my total cost of ownership, how fast can I get a service rollout and application going, and how do I scale up, right? And so, I see some customer went all the way to saying, hey, I want to drive a change, I lift and shift, which allows me to redo. Going the other way at this point and saying, wow, the cost is pretty high. And so now I can maybe see, hey, the front end I might want to run in a cloud because I need the auto scale capability. My back end I might not want to put it because it's too expensive, because the data is just too expensive to be there. And so I think a lot of times you see these cycles, but it's going to be a business decision over time. What is the cost? And then you got to make adjustments. And
you do the data centers piece as well. How are things changing in the data centers? Like, is it again like people are moving more and more to the cloud, or any more trends you're seeing in the data center?
In the data center, what I'm seeing, everybody has connectivity into the cloud.
Yeah.
Everybody keeps building out data centers. What I do see a lot of standardization around how do you build fabrics in a data center, very much focus on spine leaf designs, scale out designs, very much focus in the last year, and it will just get even more and more around what's not just the cost and the operational complexity of managing infrastructure, also what is the power aspect of my infrastructure, and how do I get to better manage my footprint, power footprint, carbon footprint of infrastructure. I think that's more and more driving decisions. And then the other piece, what I see, particularly on the networking side, I see more standardization around tooling. How do you automate? Right? It used to be I have a tool for networking, I have a separate tool for server and storage. More and more focus around consistent tooling across. And this is where some of the tools I mentioned earlier come in, right? Instead of having bespoke tools for a certain technology, more focus on abstraction and common tooling across. Because in the end, you want a common service delivered, and you don't want to go through the hassle of integrating different tools for different components that deliver that service.
So from a management, like visibility point of view, like we're not talking about Ansible, or we're talking about like something that Cisco can help with visibility, or?
Both. It's a combination of both, right? There's clearly a large interest in open source capabilities, and then being able to have this as a managed or maintained distribution by a provider vendor. Ansible is in that bucket. But then also there's clearly what you need as a counterpart to this. You need supported APIs and playbooks to support that capability. So it's going to be it's an interesting shift I see happening in that ecosystem, where there's more collaboration, I think, between different players to make that happen.
So CCNA, DevNet, Associate Preps, AWS Basic Cert, and then go down. What would you suggest after that?
Pick a project, what you want to automate, or where we want to provide visibility. And, you can start either way. Depends on where the pain point is in a company. What I see a lot for most is first go after the visibility.
Yeah. Trying
to figure out where stuff is, where is it broken, where they have hotspots, and then derive the action from there. But yeah, I think that's the path to go. And then, eventually come back to things to what the architecture requirement for the next set of applications going forward.
What do you see? Where do you see things going? You've kind of spoken a bit about that, but can you give us like a quick overview? Where do you see things going this year and in the next few years? More cloud, more bandwidth.
More bandwidth is that reminds me when I started off. I remember it's like everything was 10/100. And it was the first one saying, we can do gigabit. And I was like, who needs this?
Yeah.
I asked 3 years ago, actually the last 3.5 years ago, last live session of Cisco Live, everybody interested in 400 gig. And I had people looking and was like, Thomas, what are you smoking?
Yeah.
Every large RFP I have from for me, the enterprise service providers, 400 gig is must at this point. So it's a given, customers deploying it, we're selling clearly. We start talking about 800 gig.
I was going to say, when 800 gig coming, or?
We started shipping the first capable infrastructure that is 800 capable. I see it phasing in the core of infrastructure probably in the next 24 months. Absolutely, it will come. So that cycle of bandwidth is going to continue. What I think is slightly different is I'm more focused on the power aspect than it used to be. Yeah. Because bandwidth everybody wants, but you're going to run out of how many kilowatts you have in a rack and how many kilowatts you have in a location and what the cost is of that power. So I think there's way more focus on not just the bandwidth, which I think will keep going, but on what's the power envelope that I need to deliver that bandwidth. But that is clearly going. The other piece, I don't think this is specifically new as Lily is the automation transition is going on to standardized automation. It's clearly going on that you have to have an operational architecture approach to support hybrid, as in your own managed infrastructure as well as cloud properties, and bring this together. And then the other one I truly believe is a big play in 23 and going forward is the digital twin capabilities, to be able to model any change you do on your network, so you know the outcome before you actually click the button.
Okay. And how would I do that? Is Cisco got a tool? Or?
We have a good set of tools. We have a lot of partners we're working with. But yes, I mean, really what you want is to build a network graph and then overlay events that happen. So in the area I'm working on, we have a Nexus dashboard, and then we're working on a cloud delivered service, which is Nexus Cloud. But yes, they're products that we sell, and then the additions that you can have from our partners as well.
Do you think the days of having a whole bunch of physical infrastructures moving more to like putting everything virtualized, like virtual routers, virtual everything?
I mean, that to me it's a different layer of discussion. There's more like, where do you optimize?
Yeah.
For a while there was this discussion, hey, disaggregation, can I optimize the box from the software on top? We see this, and it's not a judgment. It's just large cloud providers will do this because there's really a benefit to optimize
like
on that end.
Things,
yeah, enterprise. It's like, instead of you buying a car because you need to drive, it's like I buy a kit and I build the car.
Yeah.
So there's a cost of opportunity. Where do you invest, right?
Yeah.
And if you're trying to figure out how to get faster from A to B, you're rather looking like, what's the infrastructure, what's the road I need, and what car do I need, and not as like, what's the best engine in the car.
Yeah.
And so I think that one I don't see really for traditional enterprise environments. Is really, that's more of a discussion in the large cloud provider space.
I'm glad you said that, because like there was this whole drive for white boxing or OpenFlow and all of that, but that's kind of like died. Except in the, like you said, in the cloud, it seems.
It is relevant, but it is relevant when you build
provider.
infrastructure. It's really not as a consumer of an IT infrastructure and enterprise, because that's not really the outcome you're shooting for, right? The outcome you're shooting for is literally, how do I connect from A to B, and how do I segment securely, and how do I have visibility? It's not how do I get the last 1% of performance out of it. So.
Thomas, we're out of time. Sorry about that. I want to keep you here for hours. I really appreciate you sharing.
Yeah. No.
And thanks for giving, especially people who knew a roadmap.
Yeah. No. Thanks, David. I really enjoyed it. So yeah,
Brilliant. Thanks.
Hope to talk again.
Yeah, definitely.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Yeah.